The journey toward the mountains of the east began with a cold wind and a sense of duty that Ezio could not ignore. He was now a man in his 50s, and though his body felt the weight of every battle he had fought in Italy, his mind was focused on a single goal. He had spent months traveling by sea and by land, moving through the dry, rocky terrain of the Middle East. His destination was the fortress of Masyaf, the ancient home of the Brotherhood. He had read about this place in his father's old letters and wanted to find the library built by Altair. Ezio arrived at the base of the mountain as a light snow began to fall, covering the gray stones in a thin layer of white. The fortress sat high above the village, looking like a silent guard over the valley below. As he climbed the winding path, Ezio realized that he was not alone. The fortress, which should have been empty and silent, was crawling with soldiers wearing the colors of the Byzantine Empire. They had occupied the ruins, searching for the same secrets that Ezio had come to find. He moved with a quiet caution, using the shadows of the old stone arches to hide his movements. The air was thin and sharp, and the only sound was the crunch of his boots on the frozen earth. Before he could reach the main gates, a group of soldiers spotted him. Even with his years of experience, the sheer number of enemies was overwhelming. He fought with a steady hand, but he was eventually captured and led into the heart of the fortress. The soldiers took him to the highest tower, where a rope had been prepared for his execution. Ezio stood on the edge of the drop, looking out over the peaks of the mountains. In that moment of silence, he saw a vision. He saw the ghost of Altair walking along the battlements as he had done hundreds of years before. The sight gave Ezio a renewed sense of strength. He managed to free his hands from his bonds and used the confusion to leap from the high tower into the white mist below. He survived the fall and began a slow, careful campaign to push back the soldiers and reach the entrance to the library. He moved through the dark tunnels under the mountain, the air smelling of damp earth and ancient stone. Ezio eventually reached the great stone door that led into the library, but it would not open. He discovered that the door was sealed by a mechanical lock that required 5 special keys. These keys, known as the Masyaf keys, had been taken away long ago to the city of Constantinople. He realized that his journey was only beginning. He left the quiet, haunted halls of Masyaf and traveled toward the coast, where he boarded a ship heading for the heart of the Ottoman Empire. The voyage across the sea was a time of rest for his aching limbs. He watched the waves and thought about the responsibility he carried. He was the only one left who could unlock the history of his order. As the ship approached the docks of Constantinople, the sight of the city took his breath away. It was a sprawling maze of golden domes, tall stone minarets, and busy markets. Thousands of people moved through the streets, and the air was filled with a mixture of sea salt, wood smoke, and exotic spices. He was met at the harbor by a man named Yusuf Tazim, the leader of the local assassins. Yusuf was younger and full of energy, and he welcomed Ezio with a firm handshake. He explained that the city was in the middle of a struggle for power, between the ruling Ottomans and the Byzantine remnants who were secretly working for the Templars. Ezio saw that the war he had fought in Rome was happening here too, just with different faces and different banners. Yusuf led Ezio through the crowded markets, where merchants shouted their prices and colorful silks fluttered in the breeze. He took Ezio to a high rooftop and showed him how to use the hook blade, a tool that allowed the local assassins to move through the city with incredible speed. Ezio practiced with the new weapon, feeling the thrill of the wind in his face as he zipped across the leather ropes that stretched between the buildings. He felt a sense of purpose returning to him. He spent his first few days learning the layout of the city and helping Yusuf strengthen the local bureaus. They recruited men and women from the streets, offering them a chance to fight for their freedom. To find the keys, Ezio needed to find someone who understood the old maps and history of the city. He was directed to a small, quiet bookshop owned by a woman named Sophia. The shop was filled with the scent of old paper and ink, and it felt like a sanctuary away from the noise of the market. Sophia was intelligent and kind, and she was intrigued by Ezio's quest. She agreed to help him translate the ancient documents that pointed toward the locations of the keys. Ezio felt a quiet connection to her, a reminder that there was a world of beauty and knowledge beyond the violence of his work. Together, they identified a hidden cistern beneath the city where the first key was likely to be found. The infiltration of the cistern began at night. Ezio entered through a heavy iron grate and descended into the dark. The air below was cool and damp, and the only sound was the constant dripping of water. He navigated the stone pillars and avoiding the patrols of Byzantine guards who were also searching the tunnels. He found the first key hidden behind a false wall of old bricks. As soon as he touched the dark metal disc, he felt a surge of energy. A vision of Altair's life filled his mind, showing him a memory of the ancient master hiding the very key Ezio now held. He realized the keys were not just tools, but containers for the past. He emerged from the cistern with the first key, feeling the weight of the discovery. He returned to the headquarters to share the news with Yusuf, but they knew the Templars would be watching them closely. The city of Constantinople was a beautiful place, but it was also a dangerous one, with secrets buried beneath every street and palace. Ezio checked his equipment and prepared for the next day, knowing that the hunt for the remaining 4 keys would lead him into the most guarded parts of the city. He looked out over the rooftops at the moon reflecting in the water, thinking about the long road that still lay ahead of him. The night was quiet, but Ezio could not sleep. He sat on a high balcony, his mind filled with the images he had seen in the vision. He felt a deep respect for the man who had created the library and a strong desire to see what else it contained. He knew that his time as an assassin was entering its final phase, and he wanted to make sure he finished the task correctly. The air was fresh, and the stars were bright over the Golden Horn. He felt a sense of calm that he had not felt in years. A feeling that he was exactly where he was meant to be. He was ready to face the challenges of the new city and uncover the truths that had been hidden for centuries. The search for the second key required Ezio to move toward the Galata district, a part of the city where the stone buildings were tall and the streets were packed with foreign traders. At the center of this area stood the Galata Tower, a massive stone cylinder that rose high above the wooden houses and the harbor. The air at the base of the tower was thick with the smell of roasting coffee and the salt of the sea. Ezio met Yusuf near a small stone fountain to discuss the plan. They knew the Byzantine soldiers were using the tower as a lookout point, and the key was hidden somewhere near the very top. Ezio looked up at the high balcony and adjusted the leather straps of his hook blade, feeling the wind pull at his gray hood. The climb began on the outer walls of the tower. Ezio used the hook blade to grab onto ledges that were too far for his hands to reach, pulling his body upward with a single, smooth motion. As he climbed higher, the noise of the shouting merchants and the clattering horse hooves began to fade. He had to be careful to avoid the guards who were looking out from the narrow windows. The stone was cold and rough against his fingers, and he could see the ships in the harbor shrinking into tiny shapes as he moved further from the ground. He reached the high balcony and slipped inside a small wooden door, finding himself in a quiet room filled with old maps and bronze instruments used for looking at the stars. Inside the tower, the air was still and smelled of old timber and oil from the lanterns. A few guards were stationed near the stairs, but Ezio used the heavy wooden beams of the ceiling to move past them without being seen. He found a loose stone in the floor near the central pillar, just as the research from Sophia's shop had suggested. Beneath the stone sat the second dark metal disc. As soon as he touched the cold surface, the vision of the past returned with a strange force. He saw Altair as a younger man, standing in the middle of a great hall in Masyaf. Altair was speaking to a group of students about the importance of recording their history so it would never be lost. Ezio felt the passion in the ancient master's voice, realizing that the library was meant to be a sanctuary for the truth. When the vision ended, Ezio heard the sound of heavy boots on the stairs. A group of guards had discovered his presence. He did not have time to fight them all in the cramped space of the tower. He rushed back out onto the balcony and saw a long leather rope that stretched from the tower all the way down to a building across the square. He hooked his blade onto the rope and jumped, sliding through the air at a high speed. The wind rushed past his ears, and the ground blurred beneath him. He landed softly on a stack of hay and quickly disappeared into a narrow alleyway before the guards could see where he had gone. He felt the weight of the second disc in his pouch and headed back toward the bookshop. Ezio found Sophia in her shop, surrounded by piles of leather-bound books and rolls of parchment. The air inside was calm and smelled of lavender. He showed her the second disc, and she marveled at the ancient symbols carved into the metal. She explained that the next key was rumored to be hidden in a place called the Forum of the Ox, an old Roman plaza that was now heavily guarded by the Byzantine leaders. Ezio appreciated the quiet time with Sophia. Her intelligence and her interest in the past were a comfort to him. He realized that the keys were not just pieces of metal, but a way to understand the man he had been following for his entire life. They spent the rest of the evening studying the maps to find a secret way into the Forum. The next day, Ezio spent time helping the Ottoman Brotherhood strengthen their positions in the city. He saw that the Templars were attacking the local markets to spread fear among the people. He taught the young recruits how to build small, effective bombs that could be used to create distractions or defend their homes. They practiced in a hidden courtyard where the air was thick with the smell of gunpowder and charcoal. Ezio saw the determination in their eyes and knew that the Brotherhood in Constantinople was strong. He felt a sense of responsibility for these men and women, reminding them that their goal was to protect the freedom of the city, not just to fight an enemy. The hunt for the third key led Ezio to a massive underground sewer system that ran beneath the most ancient part of the city. The entrance was hidden inside a ruined chapel where the air was thick with dust and the smell of damp earth. He descended a long stone staircase into the dark, his torch providing the only light against the damp brick walls. The tunnels were wide, and the water below moved with a slow, heavy sound. He had to navigate through crumbling sections of the wall and avoid the traps left behind by the people who had built this place hundreds of years ago. He felt the weight of the city above him, with thousands of lives moving unaware of the secrets hidden beneath their feet. In a large central chamber, he found a group of Byzantine soldiers who were trying to break through a heavy iron door. Ezio moved through the wooden rafters, using the hook blade to swing from one beam to another with silent precision. He used his smoke bombs to confuse the guards and took them out one by one before they could raise an alarm. Behind the iron door, he found a small altar made of white marble. The third key sat in the center of the altar, glowing softly in the light of his torch. The vision that followed showed Altair as an older man, making the difficult decision to leave his home to protect the Brotherhood. Ezio felt the sadness of the ancient master, a feeling that stayed with him even after he returned to the surface. With 3 keys in his possession, Ezio knew the Templars would be desperate to stop him. He made his way back to the headquarters, moving through the shadows of the narrow alleys to avoid the main patrols. The air in the city was cool as the sun began to set, turning the sky a deep orange over the Golden Horn. He met with Yusuf and discussed the next steps. They knew the final 2 keys would be the hardest to find, as they were hidden in the most heavily guarded parts of the city. Ezio checked his hidden blades and the hook blade, feeling the strength in his arms. He was determined to finish what he had started and reveal the secrets that Altair had left behind. Ezio spent the night on a high rooftop, watching the moon reflect in the waters of the harbor. He thought about the memories of Altair and the lessons they contained. He realized that the life of an assassin was a long journey of sacrifice and discovery. He felt a sense of peace, knowing that he was close to the answers he had sought for so long. The city was quiet, the only sound being the distant barking of a dog and the gentle lapping of the water against the wooden docks. He closed his eyes for a short rest, ready to continue the hunt at the first light of dawn. He knew the path forward would be dangerous, but he was ready to face whatever was waiting in the darkness. The search for the fourth key took Ezio away from the land and toward the open water of the Bosphorus. Sophia had discovered a reference in an old diary to a place called the Maiden's Tower, a lonely stone lighthouse sitting on a tiny island in the middle of the wide strait. The air on the water was cold and sharp, and the small wooden boat Ezio used to reach the island rocked gently in the gray waves. He looked back at the distant skyline of the city, seeing the thousands of lights beginning to flicker as evening approached. The tower stood as a silent sentinel, its white stone walls stained by years of salt and sea spray. Ezio knew that the Templars would have a hard time reaching this isolated spot, but he also knew that any trap inside would be difficult to escape. He reached the small stone dock and tied his boat to a rusted iron ring. The only sound was the wind whistling through the gaps in the masonry and the dark water hitting the base of the island. The entrance to the tower was a heavy oak door reinforced with iron bands. Inside, the air was still and smelled of dry salt and old lamp oil. Ezio found a winding stone staircase that led both up into the light of the lantern and down into the darkness of the foundation. Following the clues from the ancient maps, he descended into the lower chamber. The room was circular, with high vaulted ceilings and a floor made of smooth, dark marble. In the center stood a large stone pillar carved with the signs of the zodiac and various astronomical markings. To find the key, Ezio had to solve a mechanical puzzle built into the pillar itself. He used the hook of his blade to turn heavy brass gears and align the symbols of the stars with the light of the moon shining through a narrow slit in the wall. The machinery was old but well-oiled, moving with a series of heavy clicks that echoed in the quiet room. As the final gear was set into place, a small drawer slid open at the base of the pillar. Inside lay the fourth Masyaf key. The moment his skin touched the cold metal, the memory of Altair flooded his mind. He saw the ancient master as a man in his middle years, standing in the courtyard of Masyaf. Altair was talking to his son about the future of the Order, explaining that the Brotherhood must exist for the people and not for its own power. Ezio felt the weight of this responsibility, realizing that he was now the one carrying that torch for a new generation. When the vision faded, Ezio heard the sound of heavy boots on the stairs above. A group of Templar sailors had seen his boat from a distance and followed him to the island. They blocked the only exit their swords drawn and their faces shadowed by their iron helmets. Ezio did not panic. He used the vertical space of the tower to his advantage, climbing the central pillar and leaping from the wooden beams to strike from above. The combat was quick and fierce, the sound of steel clashing echoing off the curved stone walls. Once the path was clear, he made his way back to his boat and rowed through the dark water toward the city, the fourth key tucked safely into his belt. The city lights grew larger as he approached, and he felt the urgency of finding the final piece of the puzzle. He returned to the bookshop to find Sophia waiting for him. They sat by a small stove to warm themselves, the light of the fire dancing on the walls of the shop. Sophia told him that the final key was rumored to be hidden in the most dangerous place in the city, the Forum of the Ox. This area was controlled by the highest-ranking Byzantine officers and was heavily fortified with stone walls and many archers. Ezio knew that a direct attack would be impossible, so he spent the next few days working with Yusuf to gather intelligence. They watched the movements of the patrols and identified a secret entrance through the old Roman aqueducts that still carried water into the heart of the district. The plan was dangerous, but it was the only way to reach the final disc. The infiltration of the Forum began under the cover of a heavy rainstorm. The air was thick with the smell of wet stone and smoke from the guard fires. Ezio moved through the high arches of the aqueduct, the water rushing beneath his feet. He used his hook blade to swing over the gaps where the stone had crumbled away, his movements fast and silent. He reached the central square of the Forum and saw a massive stone vault guarded by elite soldiers in polished armor. He used his smoke bombs to create a diversion, allowing him to slip past the main gate and into the vault. Inside, the air was warm and smelled of incense and expensive wood. He moved carefully through the dark, avoiding the traps that protected the inner chamber. The fifth and final key sat on a velvet cushion atop a stone pedestal. As Ezio reached for it, he felt a sense of relief mixed with a strange sadness. He knew that once he had this key, his time in Constantinople would be nearing its end. He took the disc, and the final vision of Altair appeared. He saw the master as an old man, sitting alone in a quiet room, writing his final words. Altair looked tired, but at peace, knowing that his work was done. He spoke of the apple of Eden and the need to hide it away until the world was ready for its power. Ezio realized that his own journey was mirroring Altair's, and that he too was approaching a time of rest. He secured the fifth key and prepared to leave the vault before the guards discovered the smoke had cleared. With all 5 keys in his possession, Ezio prepared to leave the city and return to the mountains. However, he discovered that the Templars had captured Yusuf and were holding him in the main barracks. Ezio felt a cold fury. He gathered the remaining Ottoman assassins, and they launched a massive rescue mission. The battle in the streets was intense, with the sound of gunpowder and clashing blades filling the air. Ezio reached the center of the barracks and found Yusuf, who had fought bravely but was badly wounded. Ezio managed to get his friend to safety, but the cost of the keys had been high. He realized that the war for the truth never ended without a price, and he felt a deep sorrow for the friends he had seen suffer for the cause. He spent a final evening with Sophia, thanking her for her help and her friendship. The air in the city was quiet after the battle, the moon reflecting in the calm waters of the harbor. He told her that he had to return to Masyaf to open the library and find the final answers. Sophia decided to travel with him, her own curiosity about the ancient world and her care for Ezio driving her forward. They boarded a ship as the sun began to rise, the domes of the city slowly fading into the morning mist. Ezio looked at the 5 dark discs in his hand and felt a deep sense of purpose. He was ready to face whatever was waiting for him inside the mountain and finally lay the past to rest. The voyage back to the east was a time of reflection. Ezio and Sophia spoke of the future and what they might find inside the library. Ezio felt the weight of his years, but his heart was steady. He knew that he was doing what he was meant to do. The air on the sea was fresh, and the stars were bright at night, guiding them toward the mountains of Syria. He checked his blades and his hook blade one last time, making sure everything was ready for the final climb. The secrets of the Brotherhood were finally within his reach, and he would not stop until he knew the truth of what Altair had hidden from the world. The journey back to the mountain fortress of Masyaf was long and quiet. Ezio and Sophia traveled through dry lands and high rocky passes where the air was thin and very cold. As they approached the base of the mountain, the stone walls of the fortress appeared like a crown against the gray sky. There were no more guards or soldiers to block their path. The enemies had fled after the struggles in the city. The only sound was the wind moving through the empty stone arches and the crunch of snow beneath their boots. Ezio felt a deep sense of respect as he walked the same path the ancient masters had walked hundreds of years before. He looked at the high towers and felt the presence of history in the cold air. They reached the great door of the library, a massive wall of stone that had remained sealed since the time of the Crusades. Ezio took the 5 dark metal discs from his pack and looked at them. He felt the weight of the memories they held. He placed the first key into the circular slot in the door, and a deep grinding sound of stone on stone echoed through the mountainside. One by one, he inserted the remaining keys. With the final disc in place, the heavy door groaned and slowly slid open, revealing a dark corridor that led into the heart of the mountain. The air that drifted out was ancient and dry, smelling of nothing but dust and time. Ezio lit a torch and stepped inside, with Sophia following closely behind him. They walked through a long hallway lined with empty stone shelves. There were no books or scrolls here, only silence. Ezio reached a large circular chamber at the very end of the hall. In the center of the room, sitting in a simple wooden chair, was the skeleton of Altair. The the master had died alone in his library, guarding the secrets of the order until the very end. Ezio approached the figure with a quiet reverence, realizing that he was finally meeting the man who had shaped his entire life. In the hand of the skeleton was a final memory disk, glowing with a faint and pale light. As Ezio touched the final disk, he saw the last moments of the life of Altair. He saw the old man saying goodbye to his family and locking himself inside this very room to protect the Apple of Eden. Altair had sat in the dark, his mind at peace, waiting for the end of his journey. He had done his duty to the world and to the future. When the vision ended, Ezio looked behind the chair and saw a small stone pedestal. Sitting on it was the Apple of Eden, its golden surface dim, but still humming with a strange energy. Ezio looked at the artifact for a long time, but did not pick it up. He realized that its power was not meant for him, and that he had seen enough of its influence. He spoke to the empty room, acknowledging that he was merely a messenger. He understood now that his life had been a bridge between the ancient past and a future he would never see. He removed his hidden blades and his armor, laying them on the stone floor at the feet of the chair. He was finished with the life of a warrior. He walked back out of the library and into the light of the morning sun, where the air was fresh and the world felt wide and full of possibility. He took the hand of Sophia, and they began the long walk down the mountain, leaving the secrets of Masyaf behind them forever. He felt lighter than he had in decades, the mission finally complete. The return to Italy was a journey of quiet joy. They reached the rolling hills of Tuscany as the summer heat was beginning to fade. Ezio found a small vineyard with a stone farmhouse that looked out over a golden valley. This was the place where he would spend his final years, away from the shadows and the blood of the city. He spent his days tending to the grapes and his evenings sitting on the porch with Sophia, watching the stars. The air here was sweet with the scent of ripening fruit and dry grass. He was no longer an assassin. He was a husband, a neighbor, and a man who had found his peace. As the years passed, the strength of Ezio began to leave him, but his mind remained clear. He spent his time writing his final thoughts in a journal, making sure that the lessons he had learned would not be lost. He wrote about the importance of freedom and the need for every person to seek their own truth. He felt a deep gratitude for the life he had lived, even with all its pain and loss. He had seen the world change, and he had played his part in making it a better place. He watched his children grow and play in the garden, knowing that they would live in a world that was a little brighter because of his work. One afternoon, Ezio traveled into the city of Florence for the last time. He sat on a bench in the busy market square, the very place where his journey had begun so many years ago. The sun was warm on his face, and the air was filled with the sounds of people laughing and talking. He saw a young man running through the crowd, and for a moment, he saw himself as he was before the trouble had started. He took a deep breath of the city air and felt the heartbeat of Italy. He closed his eyes and allowed the warmth of the sun to carry him away. He was tired, but he was happy with the path he had taken. Ezio Auditore died quietly in the heart of the city he loved. He left behind a legacy of courage and wisdom that would inspire the Brotherhood for centuries. The White Hood was gone, but the spirit of the creed lived on in the people he had helped and the city he had saved. He was finally at rest, a man who had found his way home through the long shadows of history. The story of the Auditore family had come to its natural end, leaving a mark on the world that would never be erased. His life had been a testament to the idea that even in the darkness, one could find a way to the light. The vineyard in Tuscany continued to flourish under the care of his family. The wine they produced was known for its quality, but few people knew the history of the man who had first planted the vines. The journals he wrote were hidden away, saved for a time when the world might need their wisdom again. Sophia lived a long and peaceful life, surrounded by her children and the books she loved. The name of Auditore became a quiet legend, spoken of in the secret meetings of the assassins as a symbol of hope. The world moved forward into a new age, but the foundation laid by Ezio remained strong. The legacy of the Brotherhood did not fade with the retirement of the mentor, but instead spread like a quiet fire across the continent. In the years following the events at Masyaf, the organization in Italy and the East began to communicate more frequently, sharing the innovations that had been developed in the heat of their respective wars. The air in the hidden bureaus was no longer filled only with the tension of survival. It was filled with the steady energy of growth. The assassins began to move away from the traditional white robes of the past, realizing that to truly protect the people, they had to be able to vanish into a crowd without a second glance. They traded their heavy leather armor for simple wool and linen, becoming the silent observers of the rising Renaissance. One of the most significant changes came in the way the Brotherhood gathered information. They established a network of couriers that moved between the major cities of Europe, carrying messages hidden within ordinary trade documents. The sound of a bird taking flight from a rooftop loft became a symbol of a message being sent to a distant brother. These messages allowed the assassins to track the movements of the Templars, who were also changing their tactics. The enemy was no longer just a group of armored knights or corrupt popes. They were becoming the bankers, the judges, and the politicians who controlled the flow of money and law. The struggle was moving from the battlefield to the halls of power, and the Brotherhood had to adapt to keep pace. In Rome, the Brotherhood continued to rebuild the city that had been broken by the Borgia. They used the funds they had gathered to repair the ancient aqueducts and restore the clinics that served the poor. The smell of fresh mortar and the sound of hammers against stone were constant reminders of the progress being made. The people of Rome began to feel a sense of ownership over their city, and the influence of the assassins was felt in every district, though their faces were rarely known. They became the hidden hand that guided the city toward a brighter future, ensuring that no single family could ever hold the people in a grip of fear again. The air in the city felt lighter, and the markets were full of life and trade. The Brotherhood also began to focus on the preservation of the knowledge that had been recovered from the East. They created secret libraries in cities like Florence, Venice, and Paris, where the journals of the ancient masters were copied and studied. The scent of old paper and the scratching of quills on parchment filled these quiet rooms. They realized that the weapons of the future would be ideas and science as much as blades and gunpowder. They encouraged the young recruits to study mathematics, architecture, and history, believing that a well-rounded mind was the best defense against the lies of the Templars. This shift in focus ensured that the creed remained a living philosophy rather than just a set of rules for combat. During this time, the Brotherhood also began to look across the great oceans. News reached the Italian bureaus of vast new lands being discovered to the west, and the assassins realized that their war would soon span the entire globe. They sent small groups of explorers to join the voyages, not to conquer or claim land, but to ensure that the spark of freedom was carried to every corner of the earth. The air on the docks was filled with the scent of tar and salt as ships prepared to sail into the unknown. The Brotherhood was becoming a global family, united by a single purpose, even as they were separated by thousands of miles of water. The training of new recruits became more structured during these years. No longer were they brought in only during times of crisis. Instead, they were selected for their character and their dedication to the truth. They were taught the art of social stealth, learning how to walk through a crowded square and disappear into the shadows of a doorway in an instant. They practiced the use of the hook blade and the hidden blade until the movements were as natural as breathing. The training grounds were often hidden in plain sight, a quiet garden behind a church, or a large warehouse near the docks. The air in these places was filled with the sound of focused breathing and the occasional clank of wooden training swords. The leadership of the Brotherhood also evolved. Following the example set by the Council in Rome, other regions began to form their own circles of mentors. This ensured that no single person could be targeted to bring down the entire order. They met once every few years in secret locations to discuss the state of the world and to align their goals. These meetings were held in quiet mountain villas or hidden rooms beneath great cathedrals. The air in these councils was thick with the weight of responsibility, but also with a sense of shared hope. They knew that as long as they remained united, the light of the creed would never be extinguished. As the 1500s progressed, the Brotherhood saw the rise of a new era of art and discovery. They protected the thinkers and the creators who were pushing the boundaries of what was known. They saw the value in the printing press, which allowed ideas to spread faster than any army could move. The smell of fresh ink on paper became as important to the cause as the smell of oil on a blade. They realized that by educating the people, they were giving them the tools to fight for their own freedom. This was the true legacy of the work that had been done in Italy and the East, the realization that the Brotherhood existed to serve the people, not to rule them. The transition into the modern world had begun. The assassins were no longer just a legend from the Crusades. They were a quiet presence in the heart of the Renaissance. They watched as the world grew larger and more complex, and they prepared themselves for the challenges that lay ahead. The air was full of the energy of change, and the Brotherhood was ready to meet it. They held onto the truths they had discovered in the ruins of Masyaf and the streets of Rome, using them as a compass to guide them through the centuries. The story of the Auditor family had provided the spark, and now the entire world was starting to catch fire. The work in Constantinople was far from over even as the keys were being recovered. While Ezio was busy in the underground cisterns and high towers, he was also the primary mentor for the local assassins. The air in the city was always shifting between the scent of the sea and the heavy smoke of the blacksmith's fires. Ezio spent much of his time in the Galata headquarters, a sturdy stone building hidden among the crowded shops. He worked closely with Yusuf Tazim to organize the defense of the city's districts. The Byzantine Templars were constantly trying to retake the northern parts of the city, and Ezio knew that the local Brotherhood needed to be more than just a group of fighters. They needed to be leaders. Ezio established a system where the most talented recruits were sent on missions across the Mediterranean. He sat at a heavy wooden table covered in maps of the empire, marking the cities where the Templar influence was growing. The air in the room was quiet, filled only with the scratching of his quill and the distant sound of the call to prayer from the minarets. He sent his students to places like Rhodes and Bursa to help the local people and weaken the Templar hold on trade. He taught them that the strength of the Brotherhood in Constantinople depended on the stability of the world around it. As these recruits returned, they brought back stories of success and new techniques, strengthening the bond between the different branches of the order. In the city itself, Ezio focused on the training of the new apprentices. He took them to the rooftops, where the air was fresh and the view of the Golden Horn was wide. He taught them the art of the hook blade, showing them how to use it not just for climbing, but for maneuvering around enemies in a crowded street. They practiced sliding down the leather ziplines that Yusuf had installed across the city, their bodies moving like shadows against the orange glow of the sunset. Ezio watched them with a sense of pride, seeing the same spark of determination that he had felt as a young man in Florence. He reminded them that their goal was to protect the citizens of Constantinople, who were caught in the middle of a war they did not ask for. The relationship between the assassins and the people of the city was a vital part of Ezio's strategy. He encouraged the brothers to help the local shopkeepers and keep the streets safe from common thieves. This created a network of eyes and ears that the Templars could not match. The air in the markets became a place of information for Ezio. A simple nod from a fruit seller or a word from a carpet merchant could tell him where the Byzantine spies were hiding. he realized that the city was a living thing, and by caring for its people, the Brotherhood became part of its soul. This was a lesson he had learned in Rome, and he saw it working just as effectively in the heart of the Ottoman Empire. Ezio also spent time in the library of the headquarters, studying the first few Masyaf keys he had recovered. As he sat in the dim light of the candles, he felt the presence of Altair in the room. The memories contained within the discs were not just about the history of the order. They were about the personal struggles of a man trying to do what was right. Ezio felt a deep connection to the ancient master, realizing that they both had faced the same loneliness and the same heavy burdens of leadership. He began to understand that the library at Masyaf was meant to be a place of reflection as much as a place of knowledge. The air in the study felt thick with the weight of these thoughts, and Ezio often found himself looking out at the stars, wondering if Altair had looked at the same ones. The Byzantine Templars, led by the remnants of the old imperial family, began to launch more frequent attacks on the city's landmarks. They tried to burn the markets and destroy the bridges that connected the districts. Ezio and Yusuf had to lead the defense, moving through the streets with a lethal speed. The air was often filled with the sound of clashing steel and the thick, black smoke of the bombs they used to drive back the attackers. Ezio saw the bravery of the Ottoman assassins firsthand, watching as they stood their ground against superior numbers. He realized that the city was worth fighting for, not just for the keys, but for the life and culture that thrived within its walls. During the quiet moments between the battles, Ezio would visit Sophia in her bookshop. The air there was always a relief, smelling of old paper, and the light scent of the flowers she kept on her desk. They talked about the history of the world and the importance of the documents they were uncovering. Sophia showed him how to use the ancient maps to find the hidden entrances to the city's underground ruins. Ezio found himself looking forward to these visits, as they reminded him of the world he was trying to protect. He saw in Sophia a person who valued truth as much as he did, and their friendship became a source of strength for him as the search for the final keys became more dangerous. The search for the keys also brought Ezio into contact with the young Ottoman prince Suleiman. The boy was intelligent and observant, and he shared Ezio's concerns about the Templar influence in the palace. They met in the quiet corners of the royal gardens, where the air was sweet with the scent of orange trees. Ezio acted as a mentor to the prince, teaching him about the balance of power and the importance of justice. He saw in Suleiman the potential for a great leader who could guide the empire toward a future of peace. This connection further tied the fate of the Brotherhood to the fate of the city itself. As the month of his stay in Constantinople progressed, Ezio felt the pieces of the puzzle coming together. He had the support of the local assassins, the friendship of the prince, and the growing knowledge of the keys. The city was a beautiful and complex place, and he had learned to navigate its its many layers. He checked the hidden blades on his wrists and looked toward the horizon. The final keys were still hidden, and the road back to Masyaf was still long, but he felt a sense of confidence. He was the mentor of the assassins, and he would not fail the man who had left these secrets for him to find. The visions contained within the Masyaf keys began to change the way Ezio understood the man he had followed for so long. Every time he held one of the dark metal discs, the world of Constantinople faded away, replaced by the gray stones and sharp mountain air of the past. The first major vision through the keys took him back to the time when Altair was a young man. Shortly after the death of the old mentor, Al-Mualim, Ezio saw Altair standing in the courtyard of Masyaf, facing a crowd of assassins who were confused and angry. The air in the memory was thick with tension. Altair did not use force to lead them. Instead, he spoke about the true meaning of the creed, explaining that their power came from their service to the people, not from the artifacts they held. Ezio watched as Altair navigated the politics of the Brotherhood with a quiet patience. He saw the ancient master dealing with a rival named Abbas, who felt that he should be the one to lead. The memory showed a moment where Abbas tried to steal the Apple of Eden, but the power of the artifact was too great for him to handle. Altair stepped in to save his rival, showing a level of mercy that Ezio found profound. He realized that Altair's strength was not just in his blade, but in his ability to forgive those who worked against him. This was a lesson that Ezio took to heart as he dealt with the various factions in Constantinople. The air in the vision felt cold and honest, reflecting the difficult path Altair had chosen. Another key revealed a time when Altair had left Masyaf to live a life of peace with his wife, Maria, and their children. Ezio saw a version of the master he had never imagined, a man who found joy in the simple things, like teaching his son how to read or walking through a garden at sunset. The air in this memory was warm and smelled of blooming jasmine. However, the peace did not last. The vision shifted to a dark night when the Brotherhood was betrayed from within. Ezio felt the grief of Altair as his home was attacked and his family was forced to flee. He saw the master lose the people he loved most, yet he did not turn to bitterness. He saw Altair return to the mountains, alone but determined to protect the secrets of the Order for the sake of the future. These glimpses into the past made Ezio reflect on his own life in Italy. He thought about his father and his brothers, and the many years he had spent fighting for revenge. He realized that, like Altair, he had been shaped by loss, but he had also been given the chance to build something new. He spent hours in the Galata headquarters, sitting by a small window that looked out over the city. He thought about the responsibility of the keys and the message they were carrying across time. The air in the room was still, and he felt a deep sense of respect for the man who had suffered so much to ensure that the truth survived. He began to see his mission not just as a search for a library, but as a conversation with a brother he had never met. As As he recovered more keys, the visions showed Altair in his final years. Ezio saw the master as an old man, his hair white and his movements slow, but his mind as sharp as a hidden blade. Altair had returned to Masyaf to find it in ruins, controlled by those who had forgot the creed. The vision showed him walking into the fortress alone, armed only with the truth. The younger assassins, moved by his presence and his wisdom, laid down their weapons and joined him. Ezio saw the power of a legend in action, how a single man's reputation could change the course of history without a drop of blood being shed. This was the vision that stayed with Ezio the longest, as it showed him what it truly meant to be a mentor. Ezio shared some of these experiences with Sophia as they worked together in her shop. He did not tell her everything, as some things were too heavy for those outside the order, but he spoke of the wisdom he was finding. Sophia listened with a quiet intensity, her fingers tracing the maps of the ancient world. The air in the bookshop felt safe and grounded, a place where the ghosts of the past could be discussed without fear. She helped Ezio understand the context of the visions, pointing out the historical changes that had occurred between Altair's time and their own. Their bond grew stronger with every key they analyzed, a partnership built on a shared love for the truth. The Templars in the city were also becoming aware of the visions. They had heard rumors of the discs and the power they held, and they were desperate to take them from Ezio. He had to be more careful than ever, moving through the city in the early hours of the morning when the fog was thick over the water. The air was cold and damp, and the only sound was the lapping of the waves against the docks. He used the hook blade to move through the upper levels of the warehouses, avoiding the patrols that were searching for him. He realized that the keys were a target, but they were also his best weapon against the darkness that was trying to swallow the city. One of the final visions through the keys showed Altair beginning the construction of the hidden library. Ezio saw the master working with a small group of trusted builders, carving the secret chambers deep into the heart of the mountain. Altair spoke about the need to hide the Apple of Eden, not because he was afraid of its power, but because he knew the world was not yet ready to handle the responsibility of its knowledge. The air in this memory was dry and filled with the scent of stone dust. Ezio felt a sense of awe as he watched the creation of the very place he was trying to reach. He understood that the library was a gift for a future generation, a time capsule of wisdom meant for someone who could use it wisely. As Ezio prepared for the final stages of his journey, he felt the weight of the 5 discs in his pouch. They were no longer just pieces of metal. They were a map of a human soul. He had seen the joy, the pain, and the ultimate peace of a man who had given everything for his beliefs. He felt a sense of readiness that he had never known before. He checked his equipment, making sure the hook blade was secure and the hidden blades were sharp. The city of Constantinople was waking up, the first light of dawn hitting the domes of the mosques. He was ready to find the final answers and complete the cycle that had begun hundreds of years before. The time for research and searching was coming to an end, and the air in Constantinople felt heavy with the coming change. Ezio spent his final days in the city ensuring that the Ottoman Brotherhood was strong enough to stand without his guidance. He walked through the Galata district one last time, watching the apprentices he had trained. They moved across the rooftops with the grace of the birds that circled the minarets, their hook blades glinting in the sun. The city was a chorus of sounds, the hammering of blacksmiths, the calls of the fruit sellers, and the steady rhythm of the tide against the docks. Ezio met with Yusuf Tazim on a balcony overlooking the Golden Horn to say his farewells and to leave instructions for the defense of the city. Yusuf stood by the stone railing, looking out over the water. He thanked Ezio for the wisdom he had brought from the West, nodding that the Brotherhood was now more united than it had been in decades. Ezio felt a deep respect for the younger man, who had become a true brother and a loyal friend. They spoke about the future of the Order and the importance of keeping the city safe from the Templar influence that still hid in the shadows of the old Byzantine ruins. The air between them was filled with a quiet understanding of the risks they took every day. Ezio handed Yusuf a small map of the city's secret tunnels, a final gift to help the local assassins maintain their advantage. Before he could leave, Ezio had one last visit to make. He walked to the small bookshop where Sophia worked. The shop was quiet, the air smelling of lavender and the dry scent of old parchment. Sophia was busy packing a small chest of books, her eyes bright with the excitement of the journey ahead. She had agreed to travel with him to Masyaf, driven by her own desire to see the legendary library and her growing affection for the man who had brought so much mystery into her life. Ezio felt a warmth in his heart that he had not felt for many years. He realized that while his life had been defined by duty and shadows, Sophia represented a life of light and knowledge. The preparations for the voyage were carried out in secret. Ezio worked with the harbor masters to secure a fast ship that could navigate the eastern coast without drawing the attention of the Byzantine patrols. The air on the docks was thick with the smell of tar and salt as the crew loaded the supplies. Ezio checked the 5 Masyaf keys one last time, feeling the vibration of the metal against his palm. He knew that the Templars were aware of his departure and would likely try to intercept them before they reached the mountains. He kept his hood low and his hand near his blade, watching the crowds for any sign of a tale. On their final night in the city, a light rain began to fall, turning the dusty streets into shimmering mirrors of the lantern light. Ezio stood in the center of the grand bazaar, watching the merchants cover their stalls. He felt a sense of gratitude for the city of Constantinople. It had given him the answers he needed and a new perspective on the creed. He thought about the thousands of people sleeping in the houses around him, unaware of the struggle for their freedom that took place on the rooftops every night. The rain washed away the dust of the day, leaving the air fresh and cool. He felt ready to face the cold mountains of the east once more. The departure took place in the early hours of the morning, before the sun had cleared the horizon. The ship slipped out of the harbor silently, its sails catching the morning breeze. Ezio stood at the stern, watching the silhouette of the Hagia Sophia and the Galata Tower fade into the mist. Sophia stood beside him, her hand resting on the wooden rail. They did not speak, as the weight of the journey ahead was clear to both of them. The water of the Bosphorus was dark and calm, carrying them toward the land where the Brotherhood had been born. Ezio felt a sense of closure approaching, the long circle of his life finally beginning to close. During the days at sea, Ezio spent time talking to the crew and helping with the navigation. He found peace in the rhythm of the waves and the steady movement of the ship. He often sat on the deck in the evenings, looking at the 5 discs and thinking about the final visions he had seen. He realized that the library was not a place of power, but a place of rest. He thought about Altair sitting in the dark, waiting for someone like him to arrive. The air on the ocean was clean and carried no reminders of the blood he had shed. He felt like he was shedding his old skin, moving toward a future where he could finally be just a man. The ship eventually reached the coast of the Levant, where the air turned hot and dry. They traded the sea for horses and began the long trek inland. The landscape was harsh and rocky, with ancient ruins scattered across the plains like broken teeth. Ezio led the way, his eyes fixed on the distant peaks of the mountains. He knew the road to Masyaf was dangerous, as the Templars would be regrouping for one final attempt to stop him. He kept the group moving at a steady pace, stopping only when the horses needed rest. The smell of wood smoke from distant villages was the only sign of life in the vast, empty land. As they neared the base of the mountain, the weather began to change. The heat of the plains was replaced by a biting cold that blew down from the peaks. The sky turned a heavy gray, and the first flakes of snow began to fall. Ezio looked up and saw the fortress of Masyaf rising from the clouds. It looked exactly as it had when he first arrived, a silent, stone giant waiting for its secrets to be revealed. He felt a surge of determination. He had the keys, he had the knowledge, and he had the will to see it through. He adjusted his cloak and urged his horse forward, ready to climb the mountain for the last time. The village at the foot of the mountain was quiet, the people staying inside their homes to avoid the cold. Ezio and Sophia found a small stable to leave their horses and began the climb on foot. The path was steep and slippery with ice, and the air was thin, making every breath a challenge. Ezio helped Sophia over the rough patches of stone, his hand steady and strong. He could feel the eyes of the past watching them from the empty watchtowers. He knew that behind the great sealed door, the truth of the order was waiting for him. He took a deep breath of the frozen air and stepped onto the final bridge leading to the fortress gates. The stone bridge leading to the fortress was narrow and slick, with a thin layer of ice Ezio moved with a steady focus, his eyes scanning the high battlements for any sign of movement. The air was so cold that his breath came out in thick white clouds, and the wind whistled through the gaps in the masonry like a low, haunting flute. Behind him, Sophia walked carefully, her boots crunching on the frozen ground. The silence of the mountain was heavy, a sharp contrast to the constant noise of Constantinople. As they reached the main gates, Ezio saw that the wood was splintered and the iron hinges were rusted, showing the decades of neglect. He pushed the heavy doors open, the sound of the wood scraping against the stone floor echoing throughout the courtyard. Inside the fortress, the courtyard was a graveyard of memories. The training grounds where Altair had once taught his students were now covered in weeds and patches of gray snow. Ezio saw the skeletons of old targets and the rusted remains of training blades scattered near the walls. He felt a deep pull toward the center of the keep, where the path led down toward the library entrance. However, the peace was suddenly broken by the sound of a crossbow bolt hitting the stone pillar next to his head. A small group of Byzantine soldiers, the last remnants of the force he had fought before, emerged from the shadows of the old stables. They were tired and desperate, their armor dull and their eyes filled with a hollow fear. Ezio stepped in front of Sophia, his hand moving to the hilt of his blade. He did not want to shed more blood in this sacred place, but he knew the soldiers would not let him pass. He moved with a speed that defied his age, his boots finding traction on the uneven stone. He used his hook blade to pull a soldier's shield away, and followed with a precise strike that ended the threat quickly. The combat was not like the grand battles in the city. It was a quiet and grim struggle in the cold. Ezio moved from one opponent to the next, his movements a blur of gray and white. Within minutes, the courtyard was silent once more, the only sound being the wind and the heavy breathing of the survivors who fled into the mountain tunnels. With the area clear, Ezio led Sophia toward the heavy stone stairs that descended into the heart of the mountain. The air grew still and lost the bite of the wind, replaced by a deep and ancient chill that seemed to come from the stones themselves. They reached the massive door that he had failed to open months ago. The 5 circular slots in the stone were like empty eyes, waiting to be filled. Ezio took the keys from his pouch, the dark metal feeling warm against his cold fingers. He looked at Sophia, who stood back to give him space. He felt the weight of every life he had taken, and every friend he had lost as he prepared to turn the final lock. He placed the first key into the slot at the top. There was a low, vibrating hum that pulsed through the door. As he inserted the second and third keys, the sound grew louder, a deep grinding noise of gears shifting deep within the mountain. The air in the hallway began to feel different, as if the mountain itself were waking up after a long sleep. When the 4th key clicked into place, a line of blue light appeared around the edge of the stone slab. Ezio took the final key, the one he had recovered from the forum in the city, and pressed it into the center slot. The ground beneath their feet shook, and thunderous groan, the massive stone door began to slide slowly into the floor. A thick cloud of dust billowed out from the opening, smelling of dry earth and centuries of stillness. Ezio held his torch high, the flickering light revealing a long, narrow corridor. He stepped inside, his boots making a soft sound on the smooth floor. The walls were lined with thousands of empty alcoves, designed to hold the books and scrolls that were never placed there. He realized that Altair had never intended for this to be a library of paper. It was a library of stone and silence. He walked deeper into the mountain, the light of his torch reflecting off the walls of a large circular chamber at the very end of the hall. In the center of this room sat a single wooden chair, and in that chair sat the skeleton of Altair. The master was slumped forward slightly, his bones bleached white by time. He looked peaceful, as if he had simply fallen asleep while thinking. Ezio approached with a quiet reverence, his heart beating slow and steady. He saw that Altair was holding a small, glowing disc in his hand, the final memory. Ezio knelt beside the chair and reached out, his fingers trembling slightly. As he touched the disc, the entire room seemed to dissolve, and he was no longer in the mountain. He was standing in the same room, but the torches were lit, and the master was alive. In this final vision, Ezio saw Altair as a very old man, his movements slow and painful. He saw Altair saying a final goodbye to his son, Leon, and instructing him to lead the remaining assassins to safety. Altair then walked to the center of the library and sat in the chair, the apple of Eden held tightly in his lap. He used the artifact to record his final message, a warning to those who would follow. He then hid the apple in a secret compartment behind the chair and blew out the candles one by one. The vision ended with the sound of the door closing, leaving the master in the total darkness he had chosen. Ezio stood up, the vision fading back into the reality of the cold, dark tomb. He looked at the skeleton and felt a profound sense of connection. He realized that Altair had spent his final moments thinking of him, thinking of the man who would find this place and carry the message forward. Ezio felt the presence of the apple of Eden behind the chair, its golden surface dim, but still carrying the power that had shaped the world. He reached out his hand toward it, but then he stopped. He remembered the words of the creed and the warnings of the visions. He turned his back on the artifact and looked toward the exit, where Sophia was waiting in the light. He spoke to the silence of the room, his voice echoing off the stone. He acknowledged that he had seen enough for one lifetime. He told the ghost of Altair that he was finished with the life of the blade, and that he was leaving the artifact where it belonged. He felt a great burden lift from his shoulders, a weight he had carried since the day his family was killed in Florence. He walked back through the long corridor and out into the mountain air, where the sun was beginning to break through the clouds. He took Sophia's hand and began the walk down the mountain. A man who had finally found the truth he was looking for. The descent from the mountain was faster than the climb, as the weight of the mission no longer slowed Ezio's steps. He and Sophia traveled back through the dry lands, leaving the silent fortress of Masyaf to the wind and the snow. The air grew warmer as they moved south toward the coast, changing from the sharp chill of the peaks to the dusty heat of the plains. Ezio had left his hidden blades and his heavy armor behind in the library, a symbolic act that made him feel lighter with every mile. He wore simple traveling clothes, looking like any other merchant or scholar on the road. They reached a small port town where the smell of drying fish and wet wood filled the air, and they secured passage on a ship heading west toward Italy. The weeks at sea were a time of transition. Ezio spent long hours on the deck, watching the Mediterranean waves rise and fall. He was no longer looking for enemy sails or plotting the next move in a war. Instead, he watched the gulls and the way the sun turned the water to gold in the late afternoon. He spent his time talking to Sophia about things other than keys and Templars. They spoke of the books she wanted to collect and the quiet life they could build in the countryside. The air on the ship was clean and salt-heavy, washing away the lingering scent of smoke and old stone. Ezio felt the tension in his shoulders, which had been there for decades, slowly begin to fade away. Upon arriving in Italy, they did not go to the busy streets of Rome or the political halls of Florence. Instead, they traveled to the rolling hills of Tuscany, seeking a place where the earth was more important than the crown. They found a small vineyard with an old stone house that sat on a gentle slope. The building was sturdy, with thick walls and a roof of red tiles that had weathered many seasons. The air in the valley was sweet with the scent of ripening grapes and dry grass. This was to be their home, a place far from the shadows of the past. Ezio traded his boots for the simple leather shoes of a farmer and began to learn the rhythm of the land, finding a quiet satisfaction in work that produced life rather than ending it. The first year at the vineyard was spent repairing the stone walls and clearing the overgrown vines. Ezio's hands, once used to the cold steel of a hidden blade, became stained with the purple juice of the harvest and the dark soil of the garden. He found a deep peace in the physical labor. Sophia turned one of the rooms into a library, filling the shelves with the books they had brought from the East. The house became a place of warmth, the air inside smelling of fresh bread, wood smoke, and old paper. They were no longer running from anything. They were building something that belonged only to them. Despite his retirement, Ezio did not entirely forget the lessons of the Creed. He spent his evenings in a small study, writing in a journal that would become his final testament. He used a heavy oak desk that looked out over the valley, the light of a single candle illuminating the pages. He wrote about the truth he had found at Masyaf and the importance of individual freedom. He wanted to make sure that his experiences were recorded so that others might learn from his mistakes and his successes. The air in the study was always quiet, a space for reflection and honesty. He felt a responsibility to the future, even if he was no longer an active part of the Brotherhood. also stayed in contact with Machiavelli through occasional letters. His old friend wrote of the changing politics in the cities and the continued growth of the order, but Ezio only offered words of wisdom, not his blade. He made it clear that his time as a soldier was over. He told Machiavelli that the Brotherhood was now in the hands of the young, and that his own role was to be a memory of why they fought. Machiavelli respected this choice, recognizing that the mentor had earned the right to live in the light. Ezio felt a sense of closure, knowing that the work he had started in Rome was being carried on by capable hands. As the years passed, the vineyard began to flourish. The wine they produced was simple and good, reflecting the honesty of the life they led. Ezio enjoyed the company of the local villagers, who knew him only as a kind man with many stories. He would sit in the village square on market days, the air filled with the sounds of laughter and trade, and feel a profound sense of gratitude. He had seen the worst of humanity, but here, in the quiet corners of Tuscany, he saw the best. He realized that the freedom he had fought for was not just an abstract idea, but the simple ability for a person to live their life in peace. He also became a father, and his children brought a new kind of energy to the stone house. He watched his daughter run through the rows of vines, her hair catching the golden light of the sunset. He did not tell his children stories of the battles or the men he had killed. Instead, he told them stories of the beauty of the world and the importance of kindness and curiosity. He wanted them to grow up without the weight of the hood, living in a world that was better because of the choices he had made. He felt the cycle of his life coming to a gentle and beautiful conclusion. Ezio's health began to decline as the seasons turned, a result of the many wounds and the hard life he had led. He moved more slowly, and his breathing became heavy during the long walks up the hill. Sophia remained by his side, a constant source of strength and companionship. They would sit together on the porch in the evening, watching the shadows stretch across the valley. Ezio felt no fear of the end. He felt only a readiness for the final transition. He had fulfilled his purpose, found his truth, and built a home. The air was cool, and the stars were bright, just as they had been over the rooftops of Venice so many years ago. He spent one final afternoon sitting under a large oak tree on the edge of the property. He looked at the house, the vines, and the family he had helped create. He felt a deep connection to the earth and to the history of the men who had come before him. He realized that life was a series of moments, each one a chance to choose a path. He had chosen the path of the truth, and it had led him here. He closed his eyes and felt the warmth of the sun on his face, a man who was finally and completely at rest. The quiet peace of the vineyard was interrupted one afternoon by the arrival of a stranger at the gate. A young woman with dark hair and a determined expression stood there, looking at the stone house with a mix of hope and exhaustion. Her name was Xiao Jun, and she had traveled all the way from the distant east, from the land of China. She was a member of the Brotherhood who had seen her own order destroyed by a powerful enemy. She had heard the legends of the great mentor in Italy and had spent months crossing oceans and mountains to seek his help. The air around the gate was still, the only sound being the rustle of the leaves in the warm Tuscan breeze as Ezio stepped out to meet her. At first, Ezio was reluctant to help. He had spent years trying to separate himself from the violence of his past, and he feared that teaching this young woman would drag him back into the shadows. He told her that he was just a farmer and that he had nothing more to give. However, Xiao Jun was persistent. She followed him as he worked in the vines, asking questions about how to lead and how to protect a people who had lost everything. Ezio saw the same fire in her eyes that he had once felt in his own youth. He realized that even in retirement, he could not turn his back on a brother or sister in need. He agreed to let her stay at the villa for a short time, provided she helped with the chores of the farm. They spent their mornings working in the garden, the air smelling of wet earth and herbs. As they worked, Ezio began to share his wisdom, but not in the way she expected. He did not speak of hidden blades or combat techniques. Instead, he spoke of the responsibility of power and the importance of understanding the people one seeks to protect. He told her that a true leader does not rule through fear, but through the strength of their character. Xiao Jun listened with a quiet intensity, realizing that the lessons of the mentor were deeper than just physical skill. She began to see that the Brotherhood was a philosophy that could survive even if every fortress were destroyed. One evening, as they sat in the library, Ezio showed her the journals he had written. He explained the history of the Order and the lessons he had uncovered in the library of Altair. The air in the room was warm, filled with the scent of old parchment and candle wax. He explained that the most important weapon an assassin possesses is their mind. He taught her how to observe the world around her, to see the patterns in the behavior of her enemies, and to strike only when it was absolutely necessary. Xiao Jun felt the weight of this knowledge, realizing that she was being given the tools to rebuild her own brotherhood from the ashes. The peace was broken when a group of armed men arrived in the village. They were mercenaries sent by the enemies of Xiao Jun, tasked with finding and killing the last of the Chinese assassins. Ezio felt the familiar coldness of a coming battle, but he remained calm. He did not put on his old armor or reach for his hidden blades. Instead, he used his knowledge of the land to guide Xiao Jun in setting traps and creating diversions. They moved through the vineyard in the dark, the air cool and silent. Ezio showed her how to use the environment to confuse and scatter the attackers, proving that a well-prepared mind is more dangerous than 100 swords. When the confrontation finally happened, it was swift. Xiao Jun used the techniques Ezio had taught her to defend the villa, moving with a grace and speed that reminded Ezio of his own younger days. Ezio watched from the shadows, offering guidance, but letting her take the lead. He saw that she had learned the most important lesson, that an assassin is a protector of life, not just a dealer of death. Once the mercenaries were defeated and the threat was gone, the air in the courtyard felt clear again. Xiao Jun was ready to return to her homeland, carrying with her the legacy of the Italian Brotherhood. Before she left, Ezio gave her a small, ornate wooden box. He told her that it contained something that would help her when she felt lost, but she was not to open it until she had reached her destination. He also gave her a final piece of advice: to live her life well, and to remember that the creed is a guide, not a shackle. They stood at the gate as the sun was rising over the hills, the air fresh and full of promise. Xiao Jun bowed to her mentor, a gesture of deep respect, and began the long journey back to the east. Ezio watched her until she disappeared over the horizon, feeling a sense of satisfaction that his knowledge would continue to do good in the world. The visit from Xiao Jun had reminded Ezio of the beauty of the order. He felt a renewed sense of pride in the life he had led. He returned to his work in the vineyard, but with a lighter heart. He spent more time playing with his children and talking to Sophia about the future. He realized that his legacy was not just in the battles he had won, but in the people he had helped and the wisdom he had passed on. The air in Tuscany felt vibrant and alive, a reflection of the peace he had found within himself. He was a man who had seen the whole world and found that the most important part of it was the home he had built. As the weeks passed, Ezio continued to write in his journal, completing the final chapters of his story. He wrote a message to his children, explaining that they were the most important part of his life, and that he hoped they would always seek the truth. He felt the cycle of his life coming to a natural and peaceful close. He spent his days sitting under his favorite oak tree, watching the seasons change and the grapes ripen. He was a man at peace with his past and confident in the future. The air was filled with the sounds of the farm, a steady and comforting rhythm that told him his work was truly done. He often thought about the box he had given to Xiao Jun and the message it contained. He hoped that she would find the strength to rebuild her order, and that the light of the creed would shine in her land as it had in his. He felt a connection to the global family of the Brotherhood, a web of people dedicated to the same ideals of freedom and justice. He closed his eyes and felt the warmth of the sun, knowing that he had played his part well. He was Ezio Auditore, a man of the people, a brother of the order, and a soul who had finally found his way back to the light. The time had come for Ezio to make one last journey back to the place where his story had begun. He left the quiet hills of his vineyard and traveled toward the city of Florence. The air in the city was just as he remembered it, filled with the smell of river water, fresh leather, and the busy energy of the markets. He walked through the streets as a simple old man, his face lined with age and his steps slow but steady. He did not wear the white hood or the hidden blades. He was just a visitor in a city that had moved on from the violence of his youth. He saw the children playing in the squares and the artists sketching the great stone buildings, and he felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The city was free, and the life he saw around him was the true victory he had fought for. He made his way to the center of the city, to the great square where the gallows had once stood. The sun was warm on the stone pavement, and the air was filled with the sound of a nearby fountain. Ezio found a wooden bench and sat down, resting his tired legs. He watched a young man run past him, looking as hurried and full of life as Ezio had been decades ago. He felt no sadness for the years that had passed, only a profound peace. He looked up at the high tower of the palace and remembered his father and his brothers. He realized that the anger he had carried for so long was completely gone, replaced by the warmth of the memories of his wife and children. As he sat on the bench, a young man sat down beside him. The stranger was complaining about the city and the struggles of his own life. Ezio looked at him with a kind smile and offered a few words of quiet wisdom. He told the young man to be patient and to find the strength within himself to see the truth. The air in the square was calm, and the light of the late afternoon turned the stone buildings to a soft golden color. Ezio felt a sudden, sharp pain in his chest, but he did not cry out. He simply took a deep breath of the Florentine air and leaned back against the wood of the bench. He felt the weight of his life settling into a final, comfortable rest. The sounds of the city began to fade into a gentle hum. Ezio closed his eyes and saw the faces of those he had loved and lost. He saw his mother, his sister, and the brothers who had been gone for so long. He saw the ancient face of Altair in the library and the smiling face of Sophia in the vineyard. He felt the cycle of his life completing itself, the bridge between the past and the future finally standing strong. He took one last breath, smelling the scent of the city he had saved, and let go of the world. He died quietly on that bench, surrounded by the people of Florence, who never knew they were sitting next to the man who had given them their freedom. When his body was found, there was no sign of struggle, only a look of absolute peace on his face. The news of his passing traveled slowly to the vineyard, and then to the bureaus of the Brotherhood across Europe. There were no grand funerals or public monuments for Ezio Auditore. Instead, there were quiet gatherings in hidden rooms where assassins raised a glass to the man who had shown them the way. They spoke of his courage, but mostly they spoke of his wisdom and his ability to find peace after a lifetime of war. The air in these meetings was thick with respect, as the brothers and sisters pledged to continue the work he had begun. Sophia and her children buried him in the quiet earth of their vineyard, under the shade of the large oak tree he had loved so much. The air was cool on the day of the burial, and the only sound was the wind moving through the vines. They placed a simple stone marker over the spot, with no name or title, just a symbol that only those of the order would recognize. Sophia stayed in the farmhouse, keeping the journal safe and ensuring that the stories of the mentor were told to the next generation. She lived a life of quiet dignity, knowing that she had shared the heart of a man who had changed the world. The Brotherhood in Italy continued to thrive, guided by the principles Ezio had established. They stayed in the shadows, watching over the people and ensuring that the balance of power remained fair. The lessons of the Roman and Ottoman wars were passed down from mentor to student, creating a chain of knowledge that stretched into the future. The air in the city bureaus was filled with the steady focus of those who knew their purpose. They looked at the maps of the world and saw the work that still needed to be done. But they felt a sense of confidence, knowing that they followed in the footsteps of a giant. In the east, Xiao Jun arrived back in China and began the difficult task of rebuilding her order. She opened the wooden box Ezio had given her and found a simple letter and a small artifact. The words of the mentor gave her the strength to face the challenges ahead. She used the techniques of social stealth and wisdom she had learned in Tuscany to outmaneuver her enemies. The air in the high mountain temples of the east began to carry the same spirit of the creed that had flourished in Italy. The Brotherhood was now a global reality, a silent network of protectors that spanned the entire earth. The memory of Ezio Auditore lived on in the hearts of those who sought the truth. He was the man who had taken a broken life and built a legacy of freedom. The air in the quiet squares of Florence and the rolling hills of Tuscany still seemed to carry a whisper of his presence. He had shown that one man, driven by honor and a love for his people, could stand against the greatest empires of the world and win. He had found his rest, but his spirit remained a light in the darkness for all who followed. The story of the Auditor was finished, but the mission of the creed would never end. As the sun set over the vineyard, the shadows of the vines stretched long across the earth. The farmhouse was quiet, the light of the candles beginning to flicker in the windows. The world was moving forward into a new age, full of discovery and struggle. But in the quiet corner of Italy, the man who had made it all possible was at peace. The long journey from the gallows of Florence to the library of Masyaf was over. Ezio Auditore was finally home, and the world was safe in the hands of the future. The final chapter of the journey was not found in a book or on a map, but in the lasting change left behind in the hearts of the people. The air of the new century was different than the one Ezio had been born into. The world was wider, the cities were cleaner, and the ideas of the Renaissance had taken firm root in the soil of Europe and the East. The Brotherhood no longer acted as a small band of rebels hiding in the ruins, but as a silent and respected foundation of the modern world. They were the architects, the scholars, and the healers who ensured that the progress of humanity was not stalled by the greed of a few. The memory of the mentor was the glue that held these distant branches together, providing a common history and a shared purpose. In the archives of the order, the journals Ezio wrote were kept with the highest care. The scent of old leather and the dry air of the secret vaults protected the pages from the rot of time. New generations of students would sit in the quiet light of these libraries, reading about the struggle for Rome and the discovery at Masyaf. They learned that being an assassin was not about the mastery of the blade, but about the mastery of the self. They saw that the greatest victory Ezio had achieved was not the death of a tyrant, but the wisdom to lay down his weapons when his work was done. These journals became the textbook for the future, ensuring that the mistakes of the past would not be repeated. The physical markers of Ezio's life remained scattered across the landscape like quiet secrets. In Rome, the clinics he funded continued to treat the sick, and the aqueducts he repaired still brought fresh water to the fountains of the city. In Constantinople, the bureaus he helped organize remained the most efficient in the East, keeping the peace in a city that sat between two worlds. Even the small vineyard in Tuscany remained a place of quiet beauty, the vines producing fruit year after year under the care of his descendants. The air in these places always felt a bit more peaceful, as if the ground itself remembered the man who had fought so hard to give it rest. The hidden blades that Ezio left at the feet of Altair's skeleton remained in the dark of the Masyaf library. They sat in the silence of the mountain, a symbol of a warrior who had found peace. The apple of Eden remained in its stone compartment. Its golden light faded, but its power kept safe from those who would use it for harm. The library became a place of legend, a destination that only the most dedicated and wise members of the order would ever seek. The air inside the mountain was forever still, a sanctuary for the two greatest masters the Brotherhood had ever known. They sat together in the darkness, two lives that had changed the course of history through their sacrifice. The impact on the people of Italy was perhaps the most important part of the legacy. Because of the work of the Auditor family, the culture of the arts and sciences was allowed to flourish without being crushed by the iron grip of the old families. The freedom to think, to speak, and to create became the birthright of every citizen. The air in the squares of Florence and the canals of Venice was filled with the energy of a people who were no longer afraid. This was the true mission of the Creed, and it had been fulfilled through decades of effort. The world was a brighter place because a young man in Florence had once refused to give up in the face of injustice. As the centuries moved forward, the name of Ezio Auditore became a whisper in the wind, known only to those who knew where to look. He was the ghost in the machine, the shadow on the rooftop, and the voice of reason in a chaotic age. He had shown that a life lived with honor and purpose is never truly over, as its effects continue to ripple through time. The Brotherhood evolved to meet the challenges of new eras, but they always looked back to the Italian mentor as their guiding light. The heir of the future was built on the foundation he had laid, a world where the truth was cherished and freedom was protected. The farmhouse in Tuscany eventually grew old and the stones began to crumble, but the spirit of the home remained. The stories of the man who had lived there were told to every child born under its roof. They were taught to be kind, to be brave, and to always seek their own path. This was the personal legacy that Ezio had wanted most, a family that was free to live without the burden of the past. The air in the vineyard remained sweet, and the sun continued to set over the hills, a constant reminder that the world is a place of beauty, and Every life has the power to make it better. The story of the Roman and Ottoman wars was a testament to the strength of the human spirit. It showed that no matter how dark the times, there are always those who will stand for the light. Ezio had walked through the fire and come out the other side, not as a burned man, but as a refined soul. He had earned his rest, and the world had earned its future. The long road from the rooftops of his youth to the quiet bench in the square was a journey of transformation that would never be forgotten by those who follow the creed. The final words of his journal spoke of a life well lived. He wrote that he had no regrets and that he was happy to leave the world in the hands of those who came after him. He believed in the potential of humanity and the power of the truth to set people free. He closed the book with a steady hand, a man who knew his story was complete. The air was still, the candle was out, and the legacy was secure. The Brotherhood was ready for whatever came next, carrying the memory of the Auditor into the unknown. Ezio Auditore de Firenze was a man of the Renaissance, a brother of the Order, and a legend of the history. He was at peace, and his mission was finished.